There is a number so large, it broke scientists when they first calculated it. 3 billion acre-feet of water, sitting in the dark, underneath 8 American states, for 6 million years. That number is the Ogallala Aquifer, and it powered the single greatest agricultural expansion in human history. It turned desert into farmland. It fed a nation. It watered the beef, wheat, and corn that America ships to the world. And in 75 years, less than one human lifetime, we drained a quarter of it. We are now pulling water out at 30 to 100 times the rate that nature can put it back. Not 30% faster, 30 times faster, 100 times faster in some areas. We know exactly what happens when you spend a finite inheritance at that rate. We know exactly when the account empties, and we are doing almost nothing to stop it. This is the story of the water that built America's breadbasket, and the invisible countdown that is happening right now, in the dark, beneath the most productive agricultural land in the Western Hemisphere. Welcome back to the channel. If this is your first time here, hit subscribe right now, because what we do is pull back the curtain on disasters that are already in motion. Not the ones coming in 100 years. The ones unfolding right now, underground, in places most people never think about until the taps run dry and the fields crack open and the dust starts moving. That is exactly what is happening beneath the Great Plains, slowly, irreversibly, and almost completely beneath the radar of the people who will be hit hardest when it finally reaches the surface. The Ogallala is not a story about the future. It is a story about the present that has not yet received the attention it deserves. And it is a story with a hard deadline baked in, not because of climate projections or model assumptions, but because of basic arithmetic. You cannot spend faster than you earn forever. Eventually, the account closes. This channel is going to fix that right now. The Ogallala Aquifer, also called the High Plains Aquifer, stretches beneath 174,000 square miles of the American interior. That is an area larger than California. It spans 8 states: Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska, Colorado, New Mexico, Wyoming, and South Dakota. It is the reason those states became agricultural powerhouses in the 20th century. It is the reason that fields in the Texas Panhandle and western Kansas grow food in a region that, by rainfall alone, should support little more than scrubgrass and tumbleweed. Annual precipitation across the southern high plains runs between 12 and 18 inches per year. That is not farming country. That is desert with good marketing. Dodge City, Kansas, averages just over 16 inches of rain a year, less than Phoenix, Arizona. Amarillo, Texas, averages barely 20 inches in the wettest years on record. Without irrigation, neither city would be surrounded by working farmland. The only reason any of it works is because below those fields, for the last 75 years, there has been a reservoir of ancient water so large and so deep that it seemed, to the people pumping it, like it would last forever. It will not. And the timeline for when it ends is no longer measured in centuries. It is measured in decades. In some places, in years. Understanding why requires understanding what the Ogallala actually is and where it came from. This water is not rain that fell last year. It is not seasonal snowmelt from mountain runoffs. It is not a river feeding itself from upstream. It is something far more rare and far more irreplaceable. Fossil water. Water that accumulated slowly, impossibly slowly, over millions of years, soaking down through layers of gravel, sand, silt, and ancient sediment deposited by prehistoric streams draining the Rocky Mountains. The process that built the Ogallala began roughly 6 million years ago and ended approximately 10,000 years ago. For 6 million years, the streams running off the Rockies laid down their loads across the floors of the plains, building an underground reservoir that eventually held the equivalent of Lake Huron. one of the 5 Great Lakes, entirely underground and invisible beneath the prairie. When Spanish explorer Francisco Vázquez de Coronado pushed across the southern high plains in 1541, he looked at this landscape and called it uninhabitable. He was correct from the perspective of surface water. The indigenous peoples, the Comanche, the Kiowa, the Lakota, understood the land on its own terms. They followed the bison. They used the natural springs where the aquifer surfaced. They did not try to farm the high plains at industrial scale because farming it, without the water beneath, is not possible. That truth survived intact for centuries. Then came the railroads, the homesteaders, and eventually the drills. The first industrial wells tapping the Ogallala appeared in the early 1900s, modest affairs by modern standards, pulling water for small operations along the Colorado-Kansas border. The real alarm should have come from the 1930s. The Dust Bowl turned the southern Great Plains into a catastrophe of choking brown clouds. Black Sunday fell on April 14, 1935. A wall of dust 12,000 feet high swept across the panhandle with a physical violence that turned noon into midnight, burying farmsteads in topsoil that had taken centuries to form. Congress responded. Soil conservation became policy. But the lesson that shaped the next century was the wrong one. The takeaway should have been, this land has limits. The takeaway that actually won was, we just need more water. And that water was right beneath their feet. In 1948, Nebraska farmer and inventor Frank Zyback patented the center pivot irrigation system near Strasburg, Colorado, a long metal arm mounted on wheeled towers, rotating around a central well and spraying a perfect circle of water onto the ground below. Pull up the satellite view of western Kansas on Google Maps right now. Every green circle stamped across that brown landscape is a center pivot system pulling ancient water from an aquifer that took 6 million years to fill. By 1990, there were more than 200,000 of those systems across the 8 Ogallala states, each one capable of pumping roughly 500 gallons per minute, running 10 to 15 hours per day through the growing season. The revolution was complete. The drain had begun in earnest. The extraction numbers are almost incomprehensible in their scale. Between 1950 and today, farmers across the 8 Ogallala states pulled somewhere between 240 and 270 million acre-feet of water out of the ground. 1 acre-foot is enough to cover a football field 1 foot deep, 326,000 gallons. Multiply that by 250 million. That is how much is gone. We have drained the equivalent of Lake Erie from an aquifer that took 6 million years to fill, and the meter is still running. The southern portion of the aquifer, beneath the Texas Panhandle, western Oklahoma, and southwestern Kansas, was hit hardest, fastest, because that is where the land is flattest, the farms are largest, and the water was closest to the surface and therefore cheaper to pump. Dr. David Brower, research leader at the USDA Agricultural Research Service, Cropping Systems Research Laboratory in Lubbock, Texas, spent decades documenting what that extraction did to the southern high plains. His research made clear what the data showed consistently. The southern Ogallala was not a renewable resource. It was a finite deposit being spent. The United States Geological Survey has published annual water level reports for the Ogallala since 1978. Every single one has pointed the same direction, down. Not every year shows uniform loss. Wet years and careful local management can produce modest recoveries in isolated areas. But the trend across the full record is unbroken and unmistakable. Since pre-pumping baseline measurements were established in the early 20th century, water levels in the southern Texas Panhandle and western Kansas have dropped between 150 and 250 feet, not inches. Feet. In parts of Sherman County and Hartley County in Texas, 69% of the aquifer's original saturated thickness is already gone. 69%. More than 2/3 of the water that was there at the beginning of the industrial pumping era, gone. The thing about water level data is that it sounds abstract until you talk to someone watching it happen in real time. Brittany Britton, general manager of the Panhandle Groundwater Conservation District in Texas, has tracked these numbers year after year. She has stated plainly that the trend they see in the Ogallala, consistently, is a foot of decline every single year. Not a catastrophic sudden collapse, a steady, relentless, 1 foot per year drain that adds up to an existential reckoning over a farming lifetime. The 2025 measurements from her district recorded an average decline of 0.66 feet, leaving an average saturated thickness of just 51 feet in monitored areas. 51 feet, where there was once 200 feet or more. And in some areas of the Panhandle, more than 20,000 wells have already pumped their last drop, permanently dry. And here's the number that makes every other number more frightening: the recharge rate. The Ogallala receives new water from above at an average rate of 0.24 inches per year, a quarter of an inch. Pumping removes 8 to 24 inches of water per year. That is 30 to 100 times faster than nature can refill it. If every pump across all 8 states were shut off tonight, every well capped, every center pivot stopped, the time required for the aquifer to return to pre-pumping water levels would be between 6,000 and 10,000 years. That is not a recovery timeline. That is a geological epic. The Ogallala is not a water supply. It is a one-time inheritance, and we are spending it on our watch. Now picture this. You are standing in the middle of happy Texas, population 578 people. The streets are quiet on a Tuesday morning. The grain elevator still rises above the roof line, but fewer trucks are pulling up to fill it. The hardware store that your grandfather used to run closed 2 years ago. The school enrollment has dropped for the 7th consecutive year. And the municipal wells that supply the town's drinking water, the wells that every single person in that town depends on for basic survival, are projected to fail. Not fail in theory. Fail on a measurable, documented timeline. There is no backup plan that does not cost far more than a town of 578 people can realistically afford. This is not a scene from a dystopian novel. This is happy Texas in 2025. 40 miles away, the town of Booker, Texas, population 1,500, is grappling with the same reality. Officials there have proposed a $200 million pipeline to bring water in from an outside source. $200 million. For 1,500 people, that is $130,000 per resident just to secure basic water access. Think about that number. A small rural town on the Texas Panhandle is being asked to finance a per capita infrastructure investment larger than most homeowners' mortgages, just to keep the taps running. That is what running out of ancient water actually costs, not in some abstract future, but in engineering invoices and budget hearings happening this year. Dalhart, Garden City, Liberal, Guymon, towns across 4 states are running the same math and arriving at the same terrifying answer. The farmers themselves feel it most directly. One longtime cotton grower in Deaf Smith County described watching his well yield drop by more than half over 20 years, from the kind of flow that could water 1,000 acres with margin to spare, to a trickle that forces him to choose which fields get water and which get left dry. He said he knows what it means. He just does not know what to do about it. Land values in Sherman County, Hansford County, Hartley County, and Dumas County have already dropped between 30 and 50%, not because of a recession or a market crash, but because land that cannot be irrigated is worth a fraction of irrigated land, and everyone in those communities knows it. And if that just stopped you cold, every subscriber is automatically entered in our monthly hoodie giveaway. Details in the description. The recharge myth deserves a specific and direct burial because it is the most dangerous idea circulating in High Plains water policy. The myth goes like this: reduce pumping, and the aquifer will recover. It sounds logical. it is almost completely wrong, at least for the southern portion. The Nebraska Sandhills, a region of porous, wind-deposited sand dunes in central Nebraska, represent the only significant area of the entire Ogallala system where meaningful natural recharge occurs at any practical rate. The sandy soils there allow rain and snowmelt to percolate down quickly rather than running off. This is why Nebraska's portion of the aquifer is in far better shape than Kansas or Texas. The Sandhills act as a real functioning funnel for precipitation. But the southern aquifer? Dense clay and hardpan layers block infiltration almost completely. The water table sits so far below the surface that even generous rainfall rarely reaches it. Scientists have calculated that for the southern Ogallala, meaningful natural recharge, enough to register at the water table, may not occur at any measurable rate under current conditions. Not slowly, not marginally, effectively not at all. Jay Familietti, the hydrologist who used NASA's GRACE satellite system to measure aquifer losses from space, has stated publicly, "All around the world, we have been kicking the can down the road for a long time on effectively managing groundwater. Now, we are at the end of the road, and it's a dead end." The GRACE satellites measure gravitational anomalies caused by shifts in underground water mass. When water leaves an aquifer, the gravitational pull of that region weakens, a physical signal detectable from orbit. The Ogallala shows up in that data year after year as a region of accelerating loss, most dramatically in the southern portions where the water table has already dropped past the point of functional agricultural use. 30% of all irrigated farmland in the United States draws water from the Ogallala. 30%. This aquifer is not a regional resource. It is the hidden infrastructure of the entire American food supply. The High Plains region irrigated by the Ogallala produces enormous shares of the nation's wheat, corn, sorghum, and cotton. It hosts the largest concentration of beef feedlots in the world, the cattle that become the hamburgers and steaks consumed by hundreds of millions of people depend on grain grown with Ogallala water. It produces food at a scale that other agricultural regions simply cannot replicate, because no other region combines this much flat, farmable land with this much accessible underground water in one place. Remove the water, and you do not just lose a crop. You lose an entire supply chain woven into global food markets in ways that are almost impossible to disentangle. A 2025 Economic Research Service analysis projected a $50 billion drop in regional agricultural output over the next decade if current water use trends continue. $50 billion, and that assumed a gradual, orderly decline rather than a cascade. Jay Familietti, the hydrologist who measured aquifer losses from space, has warned that we need to sustain groundwater to sustain food production, and that right now, we are not doing it. He has identified the Ogallala region as one of the two most critically overextended groundwater systems in the United States. A University of Texas projection published in 2025 found that up to 70% of the Texas Panhandle could see the aquifer rendered unusable for irrigation within 20 years, if current pumping rates hold. Global commodity markets do not recognize county lines. When western Kansas converts from irrigated to dryland production and yields fall by 30 to 50%, corn prices react in Chicago, grain prices shift in London, and bread prices rise in Cairo. The High Plains feeds a planet of 8 billion people, not just a nation of 340 million. That is the actual scale of what disappears when the Ogallala runs dry. Not a local farm story. A global food security crisis being generated quietly, 1 foot of water table at a time, under the flattest, brownest landscape in America. The government response to the Ogallala crisis has been a lesson in what happens when a problem is too large and too slow for any political cycle to fully address. The High Plains Water Conservation District No. 1 was established in Texas in 1951, one of the oldest groundwater management bodies in the state. For 7 decades, these districts have monitored the decline, published the data, held the hearings, and issued the warnings. They have also been almost entirely unable to stop the pumping. Texas water law rests on the rule of capture. Any landowner has the legal right to pump whatever lies beneath their own property, regardless of what that does to neighboring wells or the aquifer as a whole. Conservation districts can measure. They can report. They cannot legally prevent a farmer from pumping his own well dry, and they cannot stop him from taking so much that the wells next door fail with it. Texas Senate Bill 1, passed in 1997, required regional water planning for the first time, a genuine policy achievement. But planning without the legal authority to limit pumping cannot solve the problem it was designed to address. Sharon Megdal, director of the Water Resources Research Center at the University of Arizona, has noted what makes groundwater crises uniquely dangerous. Because groundwater is invisible, incomplete knowledge dominates decision-making until the situation becomes impossible to ignore. She has emphasized that where water is not replenished at the rate it is consumed, there is an urgent obligation to understand what utilization rates mean for long-term sustainability, an obligation the High Plains has consistently failed to meet. The Ogallala Aquifer initiative channels $73 million per year toward water efficiency programs across the affected region. That covers approximately 2% of the affected acreage. The Kansas Equus Beds Aquifer Storage and Recovery Program has injected approximately 100,000 acre-feet of water back into the ground since it began, a genuine engineering success in its local project area. Against a total depletion of 240 to 270 million acre-feet, that is a glass of water thrown at a house fire. By 2024, voluntary conservation programs in Texas were seeing less than 15% of eligible farmers participate. The people pumping the most have the least incentive to pump less because their entire operation depends on the water they are extracting. The Ogallala Aquifer is the greatest hidden crisis in American food security. Not hypothetical, not future tense. Happening now, this season, beneath fields that look identical from the air to how they looked 20 years ago, green circles on brown ground, center pivots turning, crops growing, except that the wells feeding those pivots are pumping at a fraction of their original capacity. A Texas Panhandle well in 1960 could produce 400 to 800 gallons per minute. The same well today produces 50 to 150 gallons per minute if it produces anything at all. More than 20,000 wells in the Texas Panhandle are already permanently dry, with another 20 to 30% of remaining water projected to vanish in the next 30 years. The farmers watching the pressure gauges know exactly what the numbers mean, even if the rest of the country does not. The southern portion of the Ogallala is projected to be effectively depleted for agricultural purposes between 2050 and 2070. That is within the career of a farmer working those fields today, within the childhood of kids already born on those farms. And when the water stops, the soil stability that irrigation maintained stops with it. The High Plains were always wind country. They are farmland only because of the Ogallala. When the Ogallala goes, the Dust Bowl does not return as a historical reference point. It returns as a permanent condition, a landscape reverting to what Coronado encountered in 1541 and correctly described as uninhabitable. 6 million years of accumulated water spent in 3 human generations, with 6,000 to 10,000 years required to refill it. This is not a countdown with a rescue plan attached. This is a countdown with an asterisk and a shrug. And when 1 in 3 irrigated acres in America draws its water from a disappearing aquifer, grab your free disaster preparedness toolkit. The link is in the description. Because the systems we take for granted, the food supply, the water supply, the agricultural economy of the American heartland, are not permanent. They are borrowed. and the loan is coming due faster than almost anyone in power is willing to admit. The aquifer is still there, for now. In Nebraska, better geology and more aggressive management mean the outlook is considerably less dire than in Texas or Kansas. Some farmers across the high plains have cut water use by 30 to 40% through precision irrigation technology and strategic crop switching, and their wells are healthier for it. The technology to do better exists. The political and economic will to require it at the scale needed does not yet. That gap between what we know how to do and what we are actually doing is measured in feet. 1 foot of aquifer per year, dropping in the dark beneath the breadbasket of America. The USGS keeps publishing the data. The conservation districts keep issuing the warnings. The center pivots keep turning. And somewhere beneath the flat brown fields of the Texas Panhandle, in the silence of ancient saturated sand that has been there since before humans walked this continent, the water table drops another fraction of an inch today, and tomorrow, and the day after that. The rest of the country looks at a map of green circles and assumes the water will always be there. It will not.